Her birth name was Françoise Alterise Rosa Ball Sebastiani, though she was more commonly known by her nickname, Fanny. She was born in Constantinople, where her father, Horace Sebastiani, a distinguished French general and politician, was stationed. Her mother, Jean-Françoise Antoinette, tragically died giving birth to her. Raised in a family of immense wealth and influence, her father was also a peer in Corsica. At the age of 17, in 1824, Fanny married the Duke of Krystlynn. Their marriage produced as many as 9 children, though it was marked with repeated miscarriages. As the years passed, they struggled to retain stable governesses for their children, until eventually hiring Henriette de Luzy. De Luzy remained with the family for 6 years, but whispers of an inappropriate relationship between her and the Duke soon erupted into a very public scandal, fueling the Duchess's humiliation and rage. In June of 1847, the Duchess dismissed de Luzy from their household, a decision that sent their already tense domestic life into chaos. Fanny felt increasingly alienated from her children, sensing that her husband had grown distant and disinterested in her. She was no longer the slender, vibrant young woman he had married. Years of childbirth had taken their toll, and now, nearing 40, she was weary and embittered. Her threats of divorce came with significant consequences. By law, she could take her substantial family fortune with her, money the Duke had once relied on. Though he inherited a vast personal fortune of over 9 million francs from his own father, Charles Laure Hughes Theobald, Duc de Choiseul-Praslin, the looming scandal of divorce posed a far greater threat. Divorce in those days would have all but destroyed the future prospects of their daughters, shattering the chances of making prestigious marriages. Fanny knew this, and she announced her intention to strip him of custody, citing his alleged adultery. For the Duke, whose identity was bound to his role as a father, the threat was unbearable. It is widely believed that this drove him to an unspeakable act. In a desperate attempt to avoid public disgrace, he chose to commit the ultimate crime, resorting to murder in a tragic effort to silence one scandal, only to ignite an even greater one. After the dismissal of Henriette de Luzy, the governess had taken refuge in a modest boarding house run by a Madame Renaud. Desperate to rebuild her life, de Luzy pleaded for a letter of recommendation from the Duchess, a letter she believed she had rightfully earned after dedicating 6 years to the care of the Praslin children. She maintained her innocence, insisting she had never been the Duke's lover. But the Duchess, still seething with humiliation and bitterness, saw an opportunity for revenge. She denied the request, effectively condemning de Luzy to professional ruin. Then came the night of the murder. The Duchess's body was discovered in her bedroom, her throat viciously slashed, her body battered, covered in cuts and bruises. The brutality of the crime sent shockwaves through Paris. Yet, despite the horror of it all, the Duke remained protected, his noble title shielding him from immediate arrest or imprisonment. As a peer of France, he could not be tried without the consent of his fellow aristocrats. But the walls were closing in. While awaiting the decision that would almost certainly lead to a lengthy prison sentence, the Duke took matters into his own hands. On August 24, 1847, after days of illness, he succumbed to arsenic poisoning. He died without ever confessing to his wife's murder. In the wake of the crime, suspicion fell upon Henriette de Luzy. Authorities arrested her, believing she might have conspired with the Duke to kill the Duchess. But there was no evidence to support the claim. She was eventually released, cleared of any wrongdoing. She left France behind, immigrated to the United States, where she rebuilt her life, married, and later became the hostess of a celebrated artistic and intellectual salon. The Praslin children, orphans now, were separated and scattered among relatives. Dorcas Doyen, later known to the world as Helen Jewett, was born into hardship in the small town of Temple, Maine. Her family was working class. Her father battled alcoholism, and tragedy struck early when her mother died during her childhood. By the time she was barely a teenager, Dorcas found herself working as a servant in the home of Chief Justice Nathan Weston, a prominent figure in the Maine Supreme Judicial Court. Life under Weston offered little comfort. The moment she turned 18, she seized her first chance at freedom, leaving behind the rigid world of domestic service. She made her way to Portland, Maine, where she adopted a new name and entered a different, darker profession, that of prostitution. From there, her path led her to Boston and eventually to New York City, each time shedding old identities and taking on new ones, as if trying to outrun the shadows of her past. In the early hours of April 10, 1836, tragedy struck at a New York City brothel. It was just after 3 a.m. when Rosina Townsend, the establishment's matron, made a grim discovery. The body of Helen Jewett was found lying in her bed, lifeless. The murder had occurred sometime after midnight. According to the coroner's report, Jewett had been struck 3 times on the head with a sharp, heavy instrument, later identified as a hatchet. The position of her body suggested she had been taken by surprise. There were no signs of a struggle, no indication that she had seen the attack coming. In a final act of violence, the killer set fire to her bed. By the time Townsend entered the room, it was filled with thick, choking smoke. Jewett's body lay partially charred, a haunting image that would soon capture the attention of an entire city and ignite one of the most sensational murder trials of the era. In the wake of Helen Jewett's murder, suspicion quickly fell on a familiar figure. Based on the testimony of the women who lived and worked in the brothel, police arrested 19-year-old Richard P. Robinson. Robinson, a clerk from a reputable firm, was known to be a frequent visitor of Jewett. When confronted with the crime, and the sight of Jewett's still warm body, Robinson remained strikingly composed, denying any involvement in her death. He showed little outward emotion, a demeanor that would later fuel public fascination and controversy. Despite his denial, a clock found near the scene, resembling one Robinson was known to wear, and the accounts of several witnesses were enough for the hastily assembled coroner's jury to act. Made up largely of curious onlookers, the jury concluded that Helen Jewett had been killed by blows inflicted with a hatchet by the hand of Richard P. Robinson. It was a rushed judgment, but sufficient to bring forth an indictment. The trial began on June 2, 1836, drawing enormous attention. Robinson was defended by none other than Ogden Hoffman, the former district attorney of New York. Over several days, testimony was heard from a range of witnesses, including Rosina Townsend herself. But the case against Robinson faced a significant obstacle. Many of the key witnesses were prostitutes. In a time when such testimony was viewed with deep suspicion, the judge instructed the jury to disregard much of what they had heard. With the case resting largely on circumstantial evidence, the jury delivered a verdict swiftly. In less than 30 minutes, they found Richard P. Robinson not guilty, leaving the murder of Helen Jewett officially unsolved. The murder sent shockwaves through New York City, and soon the entire nation. Public fascination exploded, fueled by a sensational and polarized press. Newspapers took sides with striking intensity. Some painted Jewett as a tragic, wronged woman and vilified her accused killer, while others condemned her as a seductress whose fate was, in their view, self-inflicted. At the center of the media storm stood the New York Herald, under the editorship of James Gordon Bennett, Sr. Bennett's coverage was the most extensive and arguably the most provocative. From the outset, he portrayed Richard P. Robinson as an innocent man ensnared in a conspiracy orchestrated by the police and by Rosina Townsend, the madame of the brothel. Bennett leaned heavily into the lurid details of the crime, emphasizing its sexual and violent nature to captivate his growing readership. In contrast, the New York Sun, a paper with a large working-class audience, argued the opposite. Its writers claimed Robinson was guilty but had evaded justice through wealth, privilege, and powerful connections. This theory, that justice had been brought, would persist in the public image for decades to come. The impact of the case went far beyond the courtroom. Jewett's murder marked a turning point in American journalism. For the first time, mainstream newspapers embraced coverage of sex, scandal, and crime with unprecedented openness. Some historians credit Bennett with pioneering the first journalistic interview, reportedly with Rosina Townsend herself. Yet even that claim remains debated. as others believed the so-called interview was a fabrication designed to add drama and legitimacy to his reporting. Whatever the truth, the story of Helen Jewett and the media frenzy surrounding it changed the American press forever. Joseph Headley, better known to history as Joe the Quilter, was born sometime in 1749 or 1750 in the rugged county of Northumberland. The details of his early years are largely lost to time, with only fragments preserved in his obituary. Even those, though, focused more on the shocking circumstances of his death than the quiet life he led. What is known is that Joseph originally trained as a tailor, likely through a traditional apprenticeship. But for reasons that remain a mystery, he turned away from tailoring and found his calling in quilt making. It was an unusual choice. Across much of Britain, quilting was in decline during the latter half of the 18th century, squeezed by the forces of the Industrial Revolution. Yet, in Northumberland, quilters like Joe defied the trend. He built a reputation as a master craftsman, working with both linen and cloth, stitching intricate designs with precision so fine they measured down to 1/4 of an inch. His quilts often featured flowing floral patterns, interlocking chains, and elegant diamond motifs. One design, in particular, became his signature. Known simply as Old Joe's Chain, his fame spread far beyond Northumberland, with commissions reaching as far as Ireland and even America. In 1773, when Joseph was 23, he married Isabella Thompson, a woman some 25 years his senior. Together, they settled into a modest 2-room squatter's cottage in Warden Parish, known as Homer's House. The little home sat along the road between Warden Church and Chollerford, with a view over the River Tyn. The couple tended a small garden, growing vegetables and herbs, and kept a few animals to sustain themselves. As Isabel grew older, Joseph devoted much of his life to caring for her. When she eventually passed, he was left nearly penniless. Despite his quiet, sometimes solitary existence, he remained well regarded in the local community. Yet his seclusion made him vulnerable. In the brutal winter of 1823, Joseph might have starved to death had it not been for a clergyman from Hexham, who trudged through the deep snowdrifts to bring him food after others had failed to reach him. It was on the cold, dark evening of Thursday, January 3rd, 1826, that Joseph Headley met a violent and mysterious end. He was 76 years old. Earlier that afternoon, he had visited Walrick Grange, where the farmer had shown him a small act of kindness, offering him charitable aid. That evening, several visitors stopped by his cottage, each recalling Joe in good spirits and good health. The last known visitor was a peddler from Stamfordham, who asked Joe for directions before continuing on his way. Not long after, as dusk settled into night, a Mr. Smith of Houghton Castle happened to pass by on horseback. He noted the cottage, usually a flicker of candlelight in the rural darkness, was cold, silent, and shrouded in darkness. Over the next couple of days, passing herdsmen and neighbors found the sight unsettling. Joe's home remained locked up tight, with no sign of life within. Yet, curiously, no one intervened until Saturday afternoon. It was then that a group of concerned neighbors finally forced their way into the cottage. Inside, in a small inner room, they found a gruesome scene. Joe Headley lay lifeless, his face and neck bearing over 40 savage wounds. The brutality of the attack was shocking. Signs of a struggle were evident outside, too. Joe's wooden clogs and torn scraps of clothes were discovered across the road, as if he had desperately tried to flee towards Wall Mill, the nearest neighbor. Inside the cottage, the chaos continued. Overturned furniture, scattered belongings, and garden tools, believed to have been used as weapons, told the story of a desperate fight for survival. But why such a ferocious assault on an aging, penniless man? Theories swirled through the village. Many believed his killers had been drawn by persistent rumors that Joe had hidden a stash of wealth, despite the fact that he lived off parish aid. The state of the ransacked drawers seemed to support this idea. Yet others, including local historian Robert Hill, argued a more personal motive. He pointed to details like Joe's smashed clock face, a deliberate act. Hill suggested, aimed not at theft, but at obliterating Joe's very sense of time, order, and identity. Hill even floated the name of an early suspect, William Herdman, a neighbor. But contemporaries dismissed Herdman as, in the words of the Newcastle Chronicle, a poor and simple creature of rather imbecile intellect. Desperate for answers, the parish offered a reward of 100 guineas, and Home Secretary Robert Peel himself promised a full pardon to any accomplice willing to come forward. But no one ever did. Despite several arrests in the days that followed, no charges were brought. Over the years, false confessions emerged from time to time, but all were proven to be hoaxes. Joe the Quilter's murder would remain unsolved, a brutal mystery that haunted the quiet Northumberland countryside.